Long before he became one of Earth's mightiest heroes, Clint Barton's life was forged in hardship, tragedy, and perseverance. Born in Waverly, Iowa, Clint grew up in a fractured home. His father was an abusive alcoholic, his mother powerless to shield him and his brother Barney from the constant cycle of violence. Their childhood was one of instability and fear, with little hope for a brighter future. That hope was finally shattered when Clint's parents were killed in a car accident, leaving the Barton brothers as orphans, taken in by a traveling carnival. The Carson Carnival of Traveling Wonders. Clint and Barney found themselves immersed in a world of performers, outcasts, and tricksters. It was here that Clint's life would forever change. Among the carnival performers were two men who would shape the boy into the hero he would become. The swordsman, Jacques Duquesne, and trickshot, Buck Chisholm. Both were masterful fighters, skilled in swordplay and marksmanship, and they saw potential in young Clint. Under their guidance, Clint honed his natural agility, discipline, and most importantly his skill with the bow. Clint discovered an affinity for archery that seemed almost superhuman in its precision. Day after day, he trained until he could split arrows in midair, strike distant targets without looking, and fire at speeds that defied belief. Soon, he earned his stage name, Hawkeye, the world's greatest marksman. Yet, life in the carnival was not free of hardship. Clint idolized Duquesne, but when he discovered that the swordsman was embezzling from the carnival, his hero became his enemy. Betrayed, Clint confronted him, and the fight left the young archer badly beaten. Worse still, Barney, weary of his brother's idealism, drifted away into his own darker path. Alone again, Clint left the carnival behind, carrying nothing but his bow, his scars, and the desire to find purpose. That purpose came the night he witnessed a hero in action. While performing in a carnival show, Clint saw Iron Man save lives with courage and brilliance. Inspired, he decided to become a hero himself, not with powers, not with armor, but with nothing more than his bow and his unbreakable will. Donning a costume of purple and wielding his bow against crime, Hawkeye began his journey. At first, his vigilante acts were misunderstood. He was even mistaken for a criminal. But through sheer determination, his path slowly intersected with those of true heroes. And soon, the man once called a carnival freak would stand alongside legends. Clint Barton's life had always been a balancing act between shadows and light. He was a man who had chosen the bow as his weapon, not because it was the easiest path, but because it demanded precision, patience, and discipline. Yet, even with those qualities, Clint was a man often caught in the crossfire of worlds far larger than himself. His story in this chapter is not just about missions or battles, but about the ties that bound him, the betrayals that haunted him, and the new alliances that shaped him into the Hawkeye the world would one day depend upon. After years as a sharp-edged operative of S.H.I.E.L.D., Clint became more than just an agent with a bow. He was the man sent when others failed. Nick Fury saw in him what others dismissed: the man who could see the truth in chaos, who could make impossible shots not because of luck, but because of an almost supernatural instinct. And so Barton was placed into missions that demanded not just skill, but also an ability to question, to analyze, to judge. That it was during these years that Clint's connection with Natasha Romanoff, the infamous Black Widow, became the most defining relationship of his career. Their story did not begin in warmth or friendship, but in the cold, calculated decision of a sniper's finger resting on a trigger. Clint had been sent to eliminate her, the so-called Red Room assassin who had spilled blood across the world. But when he looked through his scope and saw her not a weapon, but a woman standing at the edge of a precipice, he made a choice that would change both of their lives forever. He spared her. Instead of ending her story, he opened a door for her redemption. And in that act, Clint carved out a new piece of his own soul. What followed was not trust born overnight. Natasha was as much shadow as light, a master of deception, and Clint knew well that her loyalty had to be earned, not commanded. But together, through fire and blood, through nights filled with silence after battles too heavy to put into words, they forged something that neither S.H.I.E.L.D. nor the world could fully understand. Became each other's anchor. She was his shadow in the field, and he was her compass in a world where morality blurred like smoke. And yet, in the midst of these alliances, Clint was never free from the ghosts of his past. Every mission pulled him deeper into questions of who he truly was. Was he merely a weapon for those in power, loosing arrows in battles that served hidden agendas? Or was he, in his own way, choosing which lives to save, Which futures to protect? These questions burned quietly within him, unspoken but constant, like the taut string of a bow waiting for release. One night in Budapest, Clint and Natasha found themselves caught in a storm of fire and betrayal. The city was alive with chaos, crumbling under the weight of explosions, alleys filled with shadows that carried knives and secrets. It was there, fighting side by side, that their bond crystallized in a way words could never capture. Every arrow he loosed seemed to mirror the blades she struck with. Every glance exchanged between them in the heat of battle spoke louder than any confession. By dawn, standing bruised and bloodied but alive, Clint understood that he was no longer alone in his war. He had someone who understood the cost of every decision, the price of every scar. But S.H.I.E.L.D. was a machine, and men like Clint Barton were cogs in its endless turning gears. He carried out orders, often unquestioned, but in his heart, he began to feel the weight of being more than just an agent. He was a man with a name, with a soul, with a destiny. The bow was no longer just a weapon. It had become an extension of himself, a reminder that even in a world of iron and gods, a single man's aim could change the course of history. As whispers of greater threats began to surface, forces from beyond the stars, beings with power beyond comprehension, Clint did not yet realize how close he was to being drawn into a conflict far larger than the espionage games of Earth. For now, he stood at the threshold, a shadow among spies, an archer among giants, a man who lived in the silence between shots. But destiny was already calling his name, preparing to pull him into the storm that would forever alter the world and reveal the true heart of Hawkeye. As the world spun deeper into chaos, Clint Barton found himself walking a razor's edge between heroism and the ghosts of his past. By this time, Hawkeye was no longer the reckless young marksman who sought recognition among gods and titans. He was a man scarred by battles, by loss, and by the crushing weight of legacy. The Avengers had risen and fractured more than once, and in every conflict, Clint's role seemed both vital and invisible. He was the human reminder in a pantheon of superhumans, the voice of mortality in a world of gods. And yet, it was in those shadows that Hawkeye's strength truly emerged. The breaking point came in the aftermath of the Infinity War, when Thanos snapped half of life out of existence. Among the vanished were Clint's wife Laura and their children. The heart that once beat for redemption was now consumed by vengeance. Hawkeye died that day, and Ronin was born. Wearing a mask and wielding a katana, Clint unleashed fury upon the criminal underworld. The Yakuza in Tokyo, the cartels in Mexico, the mafia in New York each felt the wrath of a man who no longer believed in hope. The bow and arrow were set aside, replaced by blades and blood. This transformation was not just a change in costume, it was a descent into darkness, a reflection of a man who had lost everything that tethered him to light. Ronin's path was one of justice without mercy, of vengeance without pause. In many ways, he became everything he once swore not to be: judge, jury, and executioner. And yet, behind every strike, every life ended, there was still the shattered soul of Clint Barton, haunted by the memory of the family he could not protect. But destiny, cruel and relentless, did not allow Clint to remain Ronin forever. When Natasha Romanoff found him, standing amidst the blood he had spilled, she saw not the killer he had become, but the friend she had always known. Their bond, forged in battles and secrets, was the only rope strong enough to pull Clint back. From the abyss, it was Natasha who reminded him that his story was not over, that there was still a fight worth waging. Together, they rejoined the Avengers in a desperate attempt to undo the impossible. And when the moment came, Clint once again took up his bow. Yet fate demanded a greater sacrifice. On the desolate cliffs of Wormia, he and Natasha faced the truth. One of them had to die for the Soul Stone to be claimed. What followed was not just a struggle of wills, but a battle of love and loyalty. Both were willing to give their life, but only one could. Natasha's sacrifice shattered Clint's soul once more, leaving him alive but broken, carrying the unbearable weight of her death. After the defeat of Thanos, Clint returned to his family, restored through the power of the stones. But the victory was bittersweet. For every smile at the dinner table, there was an echo of Natasha's laughter that would never return. For every moment of peace, there was the silence of her absence. Clint's legacy was now defined, not just by the lives he had saved, but by the sacrifices made along the way. In this new chapter, Hawkeye was not the youthful archer seeking glory, nor the broken Ronin seeking vengeance. He was a survivor, tasked with balancing the life of a father with the eternal scars of a warrior. The shadows of his past remained, but they no longer defined him. Instead, they served as a reminder of the fragile line between hero and human, and the price of standing on that line. Yet the world never rests, and neither can those who protect it. New threats emerged, and with them, new heroes. Among them was Kate Bishop, a determined young woman whose skill with the bow mirrored Clint's own. She was brash, unrefined, but filled with the same unyielding spark he once carried. At first reluctant, Clint became her reluctant mentor, passing down not only his skills, but also the hard-earned wisdom carved into his soul. Their bond was not of master and student, but of equals. For Kate, Clint was proof that even without powers, one could stand among giants. For Clint, Kate was a reminder that the fight never truly ends, it simply passes to new hands. And in her determination, he saw hope. Hope that the legacy of Hawkeye would endure, not as a weapon of vengeance, but as a symbol of resilience. Clint Barton's journey had brought him from circus orphan to Avenger, from archer to assassin, and back again. His scars told stories that words could not. His bow was not just a weapon, it was a testament to perseverance, to the belief that even the most ordinary man could rise to meet extraordinary challenges. And though the world might remember gods, monsters, and titans, those who knew the truth understood that Hawkeye's legacy was something greater. It was not about arrows or battles won. It was about humanity, about the courage to rise after every fall, about the quiet strength of a man who never stopped fighting, even when the world gave him every reason to. Clint Barton had carried the weight of loss, the fire of vengeance, and the burden of leadership. But more than that, he carried the band with it, the eternal reminder that sometimes the sharpest weapon is the human heart. As the years passed, Clint Barton grew older, but the legend of Hawkeye only grew sharper, stronger, and more enduring. He was never a god, never a man in a suit of armor, never a scientist infused with gamma power or an alien from another world. He was a man with a bow and a choice to fight. That choice, made again and again, shaped his legacy into something that no cosmic being could erase. After the chaos of battles that reshaped the earth and the stars, Clint found himself pulled between two lives, the life of a father, husband, and mentor, and the life of a soldier, avenger, and defender of worlds. Each demanded sacrifice, each demanded resolve, and Hawkeye, more than anyone, bore the weight of knowing he was not indestructible. His arrows could miss, his body could fail, but his will, that indomitable spirit, never once broke. When the world fractured under the threat of new rising empires, secret organizations, and fractured alliances among heroes, Hawkeye returned to the front lines. No matter how many times he tried to step away, the call of duty pulled him back. Some said it was destiny. Clint always insisted it was simply the right thing to do, because when people like him don't step forward, chaos takes the world. Yet his story was never only his own. From the shadows of his past emerged those he trained, guided, and inspired. Kate Bishop, the young archer who would become more than just a protege, carried his lessons into her own battles. Where Clint's arrows once flew, hers now soared, with precision born not just from skill, but from belief in herself, and in the legacy Hawkeye left behind. Together, master and student, they embodied the truth that heroism was never about the weapon, but the courage to use it when it mattered most. But Clint's own battles were not over. His enemies, from the ghosts of his past in the circus of crime, to assassins like Taskmaster, to the lingering shadows of his Ronin years, continued to haunt him. Every decision he made, every arrow loosed, every life taken or spared, rippled through his soul. He was not blind to the blood on his hands, but he refused to let that define him. Redemption was not a destination, it was a journey, one he walked, every day, with every shot, every choice. The multiverse, with its infinite possibilities, only expanded the scope of his tale. In some worlds, Hawkeye never lived past the first battle. In others, he became a darker reflection of himself, consumed by vengeance as Ronin forever. And in still others, he was remembered as the last Avenger standing, the lone defender of humanity's spark against overwhelming darkness. Through these echoes, one truth remained, in every version. Hawkeye stood tall, bow in hand, a man who never surrendered, and yet, in his core timeline, Clint Barton carried forward with resilience. He was scarred, yes physically, emotionally, spiritually. He carried the weight of loss, from Natasha Romanoff's sacrifice to the countless teammates and family members who had walked in and out of his life. But instead of breaking him, those losses became the steel in his spine. He knew the cost of heroism more than anyone, and still he bore it. The world would remember Hawkeye not for flashy powers or divine strength, but for his humanity. He represented the idea that anyone with the will to rise, to fight, to sacrifice, could stand shoulder to shoulder with gods and legends. He was proof that the smallest arrow could change the course of destiny. In his final battles, Clint's arrows flew true not just against enemies, but as symbols of defiance, of hope, of resilience. Each shot was a reminder that even when the world stands at the brink of despair, a single person's courage can make all the difference. And when he finally laid down his bow, it was not in defeat, but in triumph, passing it on to the next generation with pride. For the Avengers, he was a brother. For Kate, he was a mentor. For his family, he was the heart that held them together. For the world, he was Hawkeye the marksman, who proved that heroes are not measured by their power, but by their purpose. And so, Clint Barton's story did not end with silence, but with echoes in every arrow that Kate looses into the night sky, echoes in every young hero who rises without powers but with courage, echoes in every choice to fight, even when the odds are impossible. Hawkeye's legacy is eternal. For as long as there are battles to be fought, as long as there are innocents to protect, the bow will be raised, the arrow drawn, and justice will fly true. And through it all, the world will remember the man who never missed not because of his aim, but because of his heart. Clint Barton, Hawkeye, the marksman of the Avengers, the mortal among gods, the hero who proved that sometimes the sharpest weapon is the will to never give up.